Okay, so this is the travel tracker. For this project, for this walkthrough, I'm going to just first do a quick demo of how it works with data already put in, and then we'll go through the code. So if I go to log in, and I type in my username and password, we get to this main trips page that has all of our trips. And here you can sort by some of the different categories. So we can say all trips, past trips, future trips, which we have one. City, so this takes all trips and sorts by city: Bristol, Buenos Aires, Dublin. Country: Argentina, Australia, Austria. Year, starting in going in descending order. And trip title. So then if we click on view trip, we get, let's actually pick a different one. Let's do unsettled. So we click on view trip, we get information about the trip here, and then we get all the different trip highlights that have been added. So we can also add a trip highlight. So if we say place, we went to a place, test, we can create a highlight. And you can see it here. We can edit highlights. So let's say another place. And we saw things. Save highlight. Updates the title and the notes. We can also delete a highlight. And we can edit the trip itself. So we could say trip type. Let's say this is a past trip, unsettled. Let's say this was unsettled 2016. Country, this was Argentina. And year was 2016. Save trip. Now unsettled is called unsettled 2016. We can also delete a trip. Let's not delete that one. Let's delete this one. View trip. Delete. Gets back to our main trips page, and now we just have these trips. We can also create a new trip. So trip. Let's say this is a future trip. Let's say we're going to Australia. Sydney. Let's say we're going there in 2019. Create trip. We get our new trip here. Now if I click on log out, just want to show you what it looks like if you sign up. So this is the sign up page. Username, test user, email, test@test.com, password. Sign up. Takes you to this home page and it says welcome, username, create your first trip, and you can create a trip here. Takes you to the main create a trip form. So that's how it works. Let's go through the code. So we have a couple of different main things here. So we have our controllers. The first one is the application controller. So this includes our main home page, which shows this index, which is here. So this is just the image login or sign up with the title. And then we have our 404 error page here, some configuring some settings, and then our helper method. So we have a logged in, a current user, and an authenticate method. This just checks if a user is logged in. This finds the current user. And yeah, so then we have let's start with our sessions controller. Sessions controller controls login, log out, sign up, that sort of stuff. So we have our home page, which renders this page, which is that main page showing username, create your first trip, that sort of thing. We have a login page, and we have our post method that logs a user in. We have a sign up We have a post for sign up, and we have a log out. Okay, so then we have our trips controller, which this get request gets our main /trips page. So if I go to, well, this is not going to do anything because I'm not logged in, so we have to log in. Need POM_B. So then if I go to trips, we get this main trips page. And this authenticates, and basically what this is doing here is this is our sorting function. So this first sorting is past trips and future trips, and then this is the sorting for country, year, city, and title. So basically this is saying if status equals past trips, we set trips equal to current user trips where category equals past trips, or this would be future trips. Otherwise, trips is current user.trips.all. So if there's no sorting on past or future, then we're just going to get all trips that belong to that user, and we're going to set it equal to @trips. Now, if @trips does not equal an empty array, so if it does equal an empty array, we're not going to do anything because otherwise this method breaks. If it if it's not equal to an empty array, then we sort by country, year, city, and title. If it is, then we do nothing. We just render show all trips. This is our get request for creating a new trip. So we start out with these failed year, failed trip title, failed country, and failed category instance variables so that we can, and we set them equal to false, and we set them equal to true down here if some things happen, which we'll come to. But basically we start with authenticate, we set our variables equal to false, and we render our trips/new page. Then once we do the post request, this is when we check to see that fields have been entered correctly. So if this is saying if the category equals past trip and params year equals nil. So we don't want to be able to set a past trip. We don't want to be able to create a past trip and set year equal to nil. So if that's true, then failed year equals true, and this is what displays new. So this is just saying, for example, if failed trip title is true, then we say don't forget to give your trip title. This is just a way of creating an error. Let's go back to our trips controller. Same thing with category, trip title, and country. Otherwise, we create a new trip with the params trip title, country, city, year, category. We access current user's trips and add that trip to that current user's trips. And then we save current user. And then we redirect to all trips so we can see the new trip. This get request accesses an individual trip. So first we authenticate because we don't want to be able to access that page if we're not logged in. @trip is equal to trip.findById. So whatever ID we're on, @trip is going to equal to that trip. And that highlights is equal to that trip's highlights. And we're going to show trip/show trip. And let's go to this page. Show trip is here. So first thing we do is we display the trip title. Then we display trip country, trip city, trip year, trip category. And then we have our buttons down at the bottom. So we have edit trip, which accesses that edit trips edit page. We have add trip highlight, which goes to trip ID, highlights new. Then we can delete a trip. And basically what this is doing is it's preventing it from erroring out if highlights. So if highlights length is greater than 1, then we're going to do this .each function, which for each highlight, we're going to put in the place and the notes and the edit highlight button. Otherwise, if highlights.length equals 1, then we're just going to do, rather than doing .each because that would cause it to error out, we're just going to do highlights.first.place, highlights.first.notes, highlight.first.id. We also have our get request that for the edit page for edit trip. So we first want to authenticate to make sure user is logged in. Trip is equal to find by the trip ID that's here. Add highlights is equal to the highlights of that trip. And then like we did before, we have these instance variables, failed year, failed country, and failed trip title, and that takes us to our trip/edit page, which is here. Just very similar to our trips.new page. So we have the title, we have, the page title, and then the trip title here. And then we have country, city, and year. And then category. And then we also have, so because this is an edit form, we also have this patch method. And then down here, this is where we can actually edit the field. So we're going to select the trip type. We're going to select a country. We have our trip title here. We have our trip city. Select a year. So this is a for loop that takes the current year and then creates a drop-down menu that goes from 1980 all the way up to the current year. And then this again is our error message. So if the trip type, country, year, or title are not included, we get this please fill out all the fields error. So back to our trips controller, we have our patch request, which edits our trip. And again, this just re-displays the edit page if some of these fields are empty. Otherwise, we find the trip by ID, then we set the trip category, year, country, city, and we're reassigning these values here. Then we save it and we redirect to our all trips page. The last thing we have here is our delete method, which is how we delete a trip. So we only want to delete a trip if logged in and current user.trips.includes trip. Okay, and then let's look at our highlights controller. So this is very similar to the trips controller. So first we have our get request, which displays our trip ID highlights new. So this is how we create a new highlight. First we authenticate. We want to make sure that the user is logged in. We set our instance variable so that we can create an error. Then we find the trip by ID based on this parameter here. Then we display highlights new, which looks like this. So we have our page title, then we have the table with the trip title, country, city, year, category. This is the same as our view trip page. We're just redisplaying all the information about that trip. And then our actual highlight, create highlight form is here. So we have a place and notes. If failed place is true, then please include a place. We don't require notes, so there's no error message down here. And then we have our submit here. We go back to our highlights controller. So that's our get, and then our post request. We at trip is equal to trip find by ID. This is just saying if there's no place included, then we redisplay highlight/new. Otherwise, highlight.create creates a new highlight. Then we take that trip and add that highlight to that trip's highlights, and we redirect to that specific trip. We can also edit a trip highlight by going to trips, trip ID, highlight ID, and edit. First, we authenticate. We find a trip by ID. We find the highlight by ID. And then we display this highlight/edit page, which looks like this. We have the trip title. Again, we just have country, city, year, and category information about the trip. And then the actual edit form down here. We have the patch the place and the notes here, and then we have our delete button down here. So here we're setting trip equal to defined by ID at highlight is equal to highlight defined by ID. This is just our error. If params place is empty, then redisplay highlights to edit. Otherwise, we're resetting this value of highlight.place equal to params place, highlight.notes is equal to params notes, and then we save the highlight. We redirect to that specific trip. And then the last thing, we delete a trip highlight by first authenticating, setting at highlight equal to highlight.find by ID, at trip is equal to trip.find by ID, and then we check to make sure the user is logged in, and at trip.highlights includes that highlight.